Hello, all. Okay, so I see we have three of us. Let's just give one more minute. We have a fourth. That makes me feel better. Okay. Cassidy, thank you for clerking for us tonight.
No problem, anytime.
Okay, it's 7:01 and we have four of us, so I think we should get started. Let me just get our first docket item up in front of me, so the right number. It is Wednesday, January 22nd, and this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. At the start of the meeting, I'm joined by Councilors Lipoff, Bixby, and Block. I'm hoping that others will join. I'm pretty sure Councilor Downs is not going to be here. I'm pretty sure that Councilor Greenberg has something that she's attending for her ward this evening. Our first item on the agenda is 3-25, providing the annual report of the work of the Traffic Council for 2024. And we have been joined by David Kozas. Thank you, Mr. Kozas, for all the information that you provided, and would love to turn it over to you. Let me also just recognize that we've been joined by Councilor Wright as well. And go ahead, Mr. Kozas.
All right, thank you. Good evening. So in your Friday packet, you should have a memo. It's pretty much the same exact memo that I send every year. I have just one slide. If I could share it, maybe. Let me try.
Sure. Cassidy, are we set up for that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. So it's just this slide right here. So 2024, this is just a report on everything that happened at Traffic Council in 2024. It was another good year for Traffic Council. This is the summary slide that's in the memo. So during 2024, Traffic Council we had 10 meetings during the course of the year, and we handled 59 different items during the year. We didn't have any appeals. That's down here, the appeals. We didn't have any during 2024. That's the first time it's happened in a couple of years. Usually we have maybe one or two appeals during the course of the year. We did create one new parking district in 2024. That was, excuse me, it was in the Charles Bank area, a couple streets around Charles Bank in Newton Corner. We made the parking regulations in that neighborhood more consistent. And since we approved that and installed that new parking district, I mean, I haven't heard any feedback at all, negative or positive. So the other thing to highlight, I guess, is that we heard 10 different items during 2024 that we're still holding for various reasons. Some of them we're holding for trials. And I'll just very quickly go over those 10 items that are still being held, waiting to come back on an agenda. One is reducing the speed limit on Woodward Street. We're just waiting for MassDOT to respond to our memo that we sent them. That's part of our process. Another item that we held is a parking restriction on a section of Lowell Avenue near a RRFB, a rapid flash pedestrian beacon that we installed recently. So that one we're ready to put back on an agenda pretty soon. We have a trial for the Washington Street pilot that's going to be rolled out in the spring. And we do these sort of trials to allow various changes to the parking regulations in a certain area, so we don't need to permanently change the traffic and parking regulations, but just let the trial go through with the new, parking regulations, or if there's new traffic signals, for instance. That's why we would hold a trial like the Washington Street pilot. We're also part of that. Another item that we're holding is reducing the speed limit in that area of Washington Street. We're holding an item to prepare for the solar canopy project in the Ed Center parking lot, which we understand is going to be happening in the summer. And also another solar canopy project at the two middle schools at Oak Hill and Brown, which we think is going to be taking place in the summer also. We have a 1-year trial around 191 Pearl Street. That's the Lincoln Elliott School, because starting in September, that's going to be the swing space. So we need to make various changes to the parking regulations in that vicinity for 1 year. So it's being held for a trial. Also, we held an item that was an accessible parking space on Arnold Road, which we now heard is not going to move forward. We're ready to hear that one again. We held a trial. Well, it's not even a trial. We held an item to prepare for the construction at the Countryside School, the new school there. And then the last of the 10 items that's being held is a speed limit reduction on Beacon Street that we approved, also waiting for MassDOT. So also we approved 16 administrative changes to the traffic and parking regulations. These are things that if we see a sign somewhere on a street that doesn't match our traffic and parking regulations, we could change the regulations, not the signs, but the regulations administratively, just trying to make our traffic and parking regulations as accurate as possible. And so that's really it. That's all I have for the annual report. So I think I'll just return it to you, Madam Chair. If there's any questions, I guess I could stop sharing.
Sure. And if anybody wants you to put that back up, we certainly can do so. One question I have is just looking at all the traffic council items heard during the year, it seems like the vast majority are docketed either by staff or counselors. I was just looking to see how many were docketed by members of the public, and it looks like a small handful. Is that accurate?
I think you're right that the majority are by counselors or by staff. And a lot of times staff would docket an item once we heard from the public. If they say, oh, there needs to be a stop sign at the end of the street, we would look at it, talk about it internally and decide if we agree. And then if we agree, we would just docket it instead of telling the resident that they need to go and collect 10 signatures from, their neighbors. So that happens quite often. But yeah, I think you're right. But we do get also items from the general public.
Right. And part of the reason I was asking that is I also see that based on the slide you had up, it looked like the vast majority that traffic council heard were approved. And to me, the logical explanation for that seems to be that they were kind of pre-researched and pre-vetted by staff or members of the council, perhaps, who consulted with your colleagues before docketing it. So you got some mostly very reasonable requests.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we denied 3 items that were docketed last year. And I think it's exactly for that reason. Sometimes we just provide, the information or what might happen. And sometimes an item would be changed before it gets docketed in a way that seems more likely to be approved. But we do deny items, but you're right, much more likely that they would be approved.
Okay, thank you. I have a hand from Councillor Block. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the school. You mentioned several school projects. I think they were solar panels. Could you just explain the coordination between what you do and NPS around projects like that?
Yes. For example, there's a lot of coordination that happens between the planning department, the school department, city councilors, and DPW. For example, I mentioned before we have the swing space, right, at 191 Pearl Street, opening the same day in September that a new school, the new Lincoln Elliott School, is opening at 150 Jackson, right near each other. So we know that there's going to be, a lot of activity right there with the two schools right in a row. And then there's actually a third school right next to it as well. Um, we also know it's going to be only 1 year that we'll have that swing space at 191 Pearl Street. So, we met with um, the school department folks, with the principals. We thought, okay, the current blue zone, for instance, on Pearl Street and Jackson won't make sense because we're not going to want the Horace Mann parents driving and using those blue zones. Also, we're going to have six or seven or eight buses now um, on Jackson. So the regulations that are in place in that vicinity will need to temporarily change. So there's a lot of discussion about, well, where should the buses be? Where should the staff park? And so we felt like the easiest way to handle it, in terms of quickly responding to things, preparing in advance for some things that we know will happen, like where the buses will be parking to pick up and drop off, and would be through a traffic council trial, right? And then we could continue to make changes if we see that there's so much staff parking on a particular street that it overwhelms the street, and maybe the parking regulation should be temporarily changed. We could quickly put up the signs because it's already been approved for a trial. So there's a lot of thought that's been put into it and a lot of coordination in advance.
Thank you for that. That sounds like a lot of work. Um, and you mentioned, I thought, some solar panel installations. Did you say at Brown?
Yes.
And so that's a different kind of coordination goes on with that. Just explain
Well,
that.
right. So it's similar. We know that um, at some point there's going to be solar panels being installed in the parking lot in the Ed Center, right? And in the main parking lot for the two middle schools. We hope it happens over the summer when there's, the schools are not so busy, right? When the Ed Center is not as full. We don't know, for sure when that's going to happen, but we do know that all those cars are going to be displaced and then parking on nearby streets. So we docketed these items as trial for the same reason, and we're coordinating with the planning department and other city staff um, to keep in the loop of when this is going to happen. And you know some things we might want to change in advance, like putting up temporary no parking signs on a part of a street if we think that the street would be overwhelmed with cars. But we don't know everything that's going to happen, so we want to have the flexibility, right, to be able to quickly respond with the help of the police department, and the school department and our own staff looking for issues and responding. And we can do that through a trial. So it's pretty similar. It's maybe different staff.
Okay. Uh, thanks. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks. And Counselor Block, I'll just add, because I served on the working group for the Lincoln Elliott or 150 Jackson Road building, and I was actually appointed to that committee my very first term. So this is back in 2018. From the very early stages of those meetings, when we're looking at a site plan, making decisions about the buildings, it was a very interdisciplinary effort, with representation from the council, representation from the school committee, lots of folks from the administration. And then once preliminary ideas are formed, those always go out to the public meetings that were held throughout the process. And I mean, we were meeting for at least 2 to 3 hours every other week and sometimes every week for for years, really until COVID. And then we had a pause and then things, picked back up and moved a little bit more quickly after that. But um, particularly where it just concerns, if you can imagine, I mean, you're trying to imagine where should the main entrance of the new building be? How does that jive with the parking situation and the flow of traffic and the buses? And it was pretty intricate and involved. I enjoyed it very much, but it's definitely something that we think about and talk about and iterate on over many years to get to this point. It's pretty exciting, actually, to see it on here. It means we're getting closer to opening it, just to add that information.
Thanks for that additional information.
Sure. And Counselor Lucas has joined us as well, so I just want to recognize him. And next we have Counselor Bixby.
No questions. I just wanted to say thanks for all your work in these areas. I feel like it's a sort of under-recognized thing that impacts so many of our residents, whether it's ensuring people can have accessible parking spaces near their home if that's what they need, and or things like the employee parking programs that so much thought has gone into that I know you've presented to us before. So just a quick thank you and thanks for updating us on all this as well.
Thank you, Counselor.
Do we have other comments or questions? I don't see any, so I think because this is an annual report that we have, this is a no action necessary item unless others disagree. So is there a motion on this?
Just ask one question, Counselor.
Oh, of course.
Just one quick question. So just in terms of this memo that I produce basically every year, it's not a big effort for me to produce this memo. I sort of add the data after every meeting as I go, and I just wanted to make sure that the committee wanted me to do a memo, to prepare a similar memo at the end of 2025. If it's useful, I'm more than happy to do it. It's not a big effort.
I think yes, I find it useful and I appreciate the check-in and the overview and the reminder every year of what we've been doing. I see Counselor Wright has her hand up.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it is useful. And especially if you just do it after your meetings, it's not that much work, but it's helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Is there a motion on this item?
I'll move
moved.
no action necessary.
Okay, motion for no action necessary by Counselor Block. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of no action necessary, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so no action necessary was approved. And Mr. Kozis, thank you.
Thank you all
Really
very much.
appreciate all this information and you taking the time to be here. Have a good rest of your night. We are going to go on to our next item. Let me just scroll up and get the docket item here. It is number 123-24, requesting a regular discussion with the police department. And this is me, Counselor Grossman, in my capacity as chair of the committee, requesting a regular discussion with the police department of police data, including crashes, types of calls, numbers, and dispositions. And we are joined by Chief McMains. Thank you so much, Chief, and would love to turn it over to you to go over anything that you'd like to include, and especially what you sent us in our backup material, and then we'll take questions and have discussion after that.
Good evening, and thank you all for listening tonight. This is the first time I've done this, so I apologize if I left something out, or if something more you want to see, definitely let me know and we can go from there. The things I thought were important last year, not the only things that were important, but the things that struck me as interesting were car breaks and residential breaks, in addition to crashes. Residential breaks were up 117% last year, and car breaks were up about 63% last year. These are crimes of opportunity. Oftentimes, like the car breaks, I think 71% of these were unlocked vehicles. 72% of these were overnight, early morning. years ago, we had a string of car breaks, and the same thing. This happens not every year, but it comes in cycles. And oftentimes, again, people target unlocked doors. They look for car breaks or cars that have items in the front seat or in the passenger seat. Easy to break a window or open a door and just grab those items. That is not a crime that's unique to Newton. This is happening all over the Commonwealth, car breaks, as well as residential burglaries. Residential burglaries were up 117%, as I said, 18 in 2023 and 39 in 2024. This is pretty much the same thing. Entry point was at the back of the house. There's no real targets for any of these, although we did have one crime that happened a couple months ago to a Celtics coach. His house was broken into along with other Celtics players and coaches during a game when they were away. That we think was a targeted break, but I think most of these other ones have not been. Just like car breaks, the target appears to be jewelry in most cases, or valuables that they can pawn, take, cash, things like that. As I said, there's no real significant targets that we can identify based on the stats that we have. The other thing that I thought you folks would want to know, other than the crashes, is hate crimes and hate incidents. Of note, in 2023, we had 49 hate incidents, and this year we had 67 hate incidents, which typically are speech, things like that don't amount to a crime, but yet have an underlying flavor of bias. Last year, 2023, we had 1 hate crime, and in 2024, we had 7 hate crimes. The hate crime in 2023 was on Elliott Street. Somebody scratched, I won't use the word, but F gays into a window. And in 2024, we had several signs that were either pro-Jewish or pro-Muslim signs that were either taken or defaced. We had swastikas drawn on a couple of those. Those we see because of the, excuse me, the issues going on in the Middle East, and they come back to the United States, and they're happening in Newton, and again, pretty much all over the Commonwealth. But these are things that we focus on. We do directed patrols. I don't know if you all got a chance to look at the calls for service. We have a significant number of directed patrols every year, whether it's based on the information that we've found to be concerning to us, or from residents who called to complain or suggest that they would like additional services or drive-bys at their homes. So crashes, we have a number of crashes. Those are up. So let me see if I can pull those up here. Crashes are only up, car crashes rather, are up 6%. Pedestrian crashes, thankfully, are down 30%. Bicycle crashes are up 27%. These are, there's no real crime pattern to these either. These are scattered throughout the city. Center and Washington Street seems to be the death circle, where I hate to call it the death circle, but we have a ton of crashes in that location. We had a significant increase at Franklin and Waverly Street this year, and the crash factors there seem to be around a stop sign. Either people pull up to the stop sign and don't see somebody coming over the hill, they kind of slowly leak out, and then boom, they get struck by a car, or they just plain don't see the stop sign and drive right through it and get into a car crash. Seems like more than half of the crashes that occurred were in intersections or in parking lots. That's not something the city can really control. Parking lot crashes. Newton Wellesley Hospital seems to be a big one pretty much every year for whatever reason. I'm not sure how people get into crashes in parking lots, but whether it's backing out unsafely or not paying attention to the rearview mirror or whatever the case may be. But those are typically the kind of crashes that we have in parking lots. Bicycle crashes, again, are up 27%. We had 22 in 2023. We had 28 this year. We have really looked at citing folks both on bicycles and in motor vehicles for infractions that are caused by that. And a lot of these crashes are inattentiveness by drivers, right? We do calming, the city does calming matter things all over the city, yet we still have crashes in the same locations. And again, we have several grants. I've come before several committees this year asking for money to spend for grants that we received for, traffic enforcement. And we've written a significant amount of tickets based on those grants, and yet we still have crashes in the same locations. It is, our presence definitely deters crashes, but again, we can't be at all these locations every day, all day. So hence the crashes are usually there when we're not there. That's really all I had prepared. Again, I don't know what specifically you folks are looking for, so I'm happy to answer any questions or.
Thank you. We will bring it back to the counselors for questions. One about the residential burglaries. Well, a few about that, actually. I think my first question is, do you find patterns sort of in neighborhoods or clusters in neighborhoods where it occurs? And the second thing is, what are some of the common factors? I mean, you mentioned usually the rear of the house and sort of crimes of opportunity. So I'm wondering how consistent it is that when that's occurring, somebody's leaving doors unlocked or windows unlocked or what have you, or if it's a more high-tech entry.
Yeah, they're not typically high-tech entries. They're cut screens, they're shattering glass, they're breaking windows, and they're ultimately finding a car or house doors unlocked. One of the patterns prior to my job in the chief's office, I worked in the detective bureau for about 14 years. And what we often found was they will do a drive by a house or walk by a house, see no lights on for a while, they'll come back. They will look for Ring cameras, they'll look for motion sensors, motion lights, things like that. From time to time, they'll knock on the front door, make sure nobody's home. They sneak around the back, they break into a window, or they wait to see somebody leave. They'll break into through a back window or a back door there. And they pretty much know they have time to go through the house, whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. These folks can do a lot of damage in 15 minutes. We don't have a good rule time frame on a lot of these breaks because, again, they're hitting houses that don't have Ring cameras, for instance, or Nest cameras or any other type of surveillance cameras that would maybe catch these folks in the act. The houses are not alarmed typically. Yeah, that's pretty much it with residential burglaries. Again, we don't really have a pattern. A couple of years ago, we had victims of Asian descent, and we think those were definitely targeted. That was either, I think, the beginning of 2024 and the end of 2023. But since then, it's just been a scattering of random breaks that, again, are crimes of opportunity.
How do they know that the houses are not alarmed?
I don't think they necessarily know, but they can look through a window and see. Most everybody has a door panel, alarm panel right next to their door. It's also interesting, and I'm not recommending that anybody do this, but there have been people in Newton who told us that they have an ADT stick thing and they just put it in their lawn. And that kind of deters folks from breaking in as well. I don't think there's any way to tell whether those folks really know why they're targeting those houses other than they know that nobody's home. Again, everybody knows what a Ring camera looks like, a Ring doorbell, so they know that those are things that they stay away from. Again, I've been out of the detective bureau since 2019, but I know we interviewed a bunch of folks that we arrested when I worked in that bureau, and we always asked them, why did you do this or why would you do this? And oddly enough, they didn't usually want to talk to us. So we really got no information from them after the fact. But those were things that we really look at. And unfortunately, Newton's a pretty quiet town at night. And we drive around the city, I don't want to say aimlessly, but we just drive through neighborhoods. And usually 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, the only ones that are out are police officers, right? And there's a good chance they're going to see us coming. They're going to hide behind a car, wait for us to pass. And again, these are really crimes of opportunity. I think if folks keep their windows closed or have motion lights or again have ring cameras or something that will deter folks from wanting to break into their house, I think that's the best avenue to approach to deter these folks.
Okay, I appreciate that. We have hands from a few members of the committee. Counselor Wright, you're first.
Thank you. And I had a question on the house breaks targeting Asians, but you said, I thought it was last year, but it was a couple years ago. The next one, which you may not know, and I'm going to pull up the email. So from Mr. Norcross and with Captain Devine is we had an issue for Halloween block party closure. And one of the streets in our ward, they've been doing it for 10 years, and they originally got, no, you can't have a block party closure for Halloween. But they had a 10-year history of this. How are you going to determine which streets are closed in the future and which ones can't? I mean, they've been doing it for, like, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, and they applied like they always do, and then they were told no. And at least this year they got the okay. But how are you going to hand out those street closures for Halloween?
I think there's a number of things that we look at when we decide whether we'll allow block parties or not. One of the biggest things is neighborhood notification. We want to make sure that the neighborhood's not going to be put out by closing down a street. Perhaps they have an elderly person who needs care, issues that may arise with getting in and out of the neighborhood during these block parties. Again, I don't know the specifics. I apologize for that, but those are things that I think about when I think about whether we would allow a block party or not. Those are the things that pop up immediately.
Are you going to limit to, because they were saying because of Halloween specifically and people out and stuff, that they're going to limit it. And I'd like to know, how many you're limiting it to, what's the process? I mean, they really want to go forward and continue it because it's been like 10 years that they've been doing the block party. And I think this is the second longest block party in Ward 3, but there's probably other streets too that do this.
Yeah, I'm not for sure how many streets do the Halloween block parties. Again, my concern would be if we need to get into a community or get through a community to respond to a call for service, that would be my biggest concern. If we close a street, the fire department has to be rerouted, the ambulances have to be rerouted. The police are a little different. We're more agile. We can get our cruisers around different locations, but fire and medics seem to be the biggest issue with getting around locations that are closed down. And not so much the police and fire. We're pretty much here every day. The medics, they might not be working in this community very long, or they bounce from community to community, so they might not know the ways around so much. But again, I don't know the specific answer to that, and I can get back to you. I can find out that information and get back to you.
That would be good, because this street is Elliott, which is parallel to a bunch of other streets. So it's not that street's closed, it could be the other ones, but it might be also an issue to other parts of the city. And the next question I had with the new police chief, I heard, I don't know if it's a fact or not, he's going to concentrate on motor vehicle enforcement, which a lot of us would like that to do, speeding, things like that. Is that true or not? Or
I didn't hear that rumor.
Okay.
I think it's important that we do that. I think it's important that we enforce, right? I mean, it's twofold. We don't always have to write money fine citations for these folks. It depends on their driver history, it depends on the factors that went into it, why we stopped somebody. I think education is a huge part of that. I think Chief Carmichael before me, Chief McDonald before that, I don't want to say always been our thoughts on that, but education, I think, is the biggest thing. If we can stop somebody from creating a motor vehicle violation by simply talking to those folks, that's ideally how we'd like to do that. And I will say that I don't want to say every day coming and going from work, I make a car stop, but significant amounts of those days every week, I make a car stop either going to work or coming into work or going home from work. And those have all been pretty educational, right? I mean, I think I've written maybe 5 tickets in the last few years. And that's based on, again, driver history. People don't care that they created a potential crash, or they just did so flagrantly that they deserved a ticket. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Counselor Block.
Thank you. I'm interested in the crash data that you have in two different ways. One, retrospectively, the locations of this year's crashes. You mentioned a few types of locations like parking lots. How difficult would it be? Maybe it's just, do you have this in spreadsheet form that's broken down by, I don't know, I guess precinct, maybe ward precinct kind of things, so that, somewhat parochially, I'm in Ward 4 and I like to know what's going on as soon as possible. Do you have it broken down that way? Is there a way to look at it from just a geographical point of view?
We don't have it broken down by ward. We have, again, a document that's created through our report management system. We are also opening up, we've engaged LexisNexis, however you say it, in a data system that is going to be able to create real-time maps that we can look at to show density or hotspots of crashes, or since you talked about crashes, specifically crashes, house breaks, car breaks, things like that. We don't typically have anything, or we don't right now have anything that's in a spreadsheet type document. Again, we use our records management system to manage where these crashes are happening most frequently and the crash factors that really result in these crashes.
This issue of crashes came up a few months ago on Commonwealth Avenue, where the state is redesigning the carriageway between basically between Melrose and the Marriott. And it wasn't a hotspot in the sense of a lot of accidents, but because there was a lot of construction and a lot of detouring, and these things were changing pretty frequently over the course of a couple of months, that just one crash was a warning that something needed to be improved in terms of signage or in terms of design. And I learned about a crash by accident, really, no pun intended, at Islington and Comm Ave, and that led to all sorts of interactions between me and Mass DOT and DPW. And I just have this sinking feeling that I'm not, I don't want to learn by accident. I want to learn in some planned way, so that when something happens, I'm not saying you have to inform every city councilor about every crash, but if there's a place where I can go, some website, some spreadsheet, something that I could check in every week perhaps and see, all right, especially in my ward, that probably each of us are most interested in the wards that we live in. I think that would be very helpful. And I learned about a crash a couple of months after the fact, again, during this construction of the carriageway, and that made me aware that there were design issues at different intersections than just Islington and Comm Ave. The rest of you may not be sort of worrying so much about Mass DOT, but in Ward 4, they're very, very active. So how do I sort of peer into this crash data sort of in much closer to when it's actually getting reported to you without adding burdens to your work? Because I don't want to do that.
I appreciate that, Counselor. And one thing I will say about that is, especially ComAv near the Marriott, right? That's been a mess for a while now. And one of the issues that seems to pop up in some of these crash factors is people use Waze or they use some other device to try to tell them how to get where they're going. And then they look up and they see a sign that says you can't do this or you can't do that. And that causes some confusion and ultimately into they're too busy looking around to see what's going on to paying attention to the street. But as I said, we have purchased a program LexisNexis puts out that allows us to portray crash data. I'm not sure how real time it's going to be, but we will have a public facing side to that the public will be able to access and find crashes. I'll have to get back to you on whether that's something that you'll be able to look up and say, I want to look at Comm Avenue or Islington Street or Islington Road or something like that. I'll have to see how that works, but I'm not really sure how that system is going to work. I just know that we've bought the program. We're working with the programmers now to get our data up there, so we're able to view that not only for crashes but pedestrian stuff and bicycle crashes as well.
Well, yes. I mean, all the car, pedestrian, and bicycle crashes, they're all really important.
Certainly.
And um, I understand your focus on quantity and hotspots, but in the cases that I was dealing with, they weren't hotspots. They were the cutting edge of a potential hotspot, and I wanted to do something about it before there were more crashes. And I think I got Mass DOT and DPW all focused on this stretch of construction that was going on to try and make the signage better, to try and modify the designs even just a little bit to give everybody a little more room. I, I'd really be willing to spend some time to dive into your crash data for the past year and try and map it out. If that isn't something that you can do, but I mean, if we have the intersections, if we have the addresses, it's laborious, but we can create something and maybe we'll learn something from it. So please consider that an offer.
Absolutely happy to consider that. Sure.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for now.
I just want to add actually that this is a topic that has come up over the last few years, and in particular, the folks from Safe Routes to School, as well as some of the leaders of the bicyclist community in Newton have sort of brainstormed and suggested ways we might work towards some sort of like a crash database. One of the leaders of that effort was Jen Martin, who now works for the city. So I'm hopeful that her entree into city administration may help to make that more possible, because I think what we really need is coordination between the data that the police department has and the coordination and information from DPW as well, and making sure that that information is getting, to the different parties who can think about and analyze ways we might restructure whatever it is, an intersection or traffic calming or what have you. And Chief Carmichael and I actually discussed that towards the end of his tenure. And obviously our new Chief McMains is coming in and, inheriting all of that. So, Chief, just, something to keep on your radar, and hopefully, with the technology that we have now, we can work towards that direction. It's just more information and more transparency and more coordination only helps make us all safer, I think.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up on what we just talked about on Councilor Block. If you're looking for the top crash locations in Newton, I have a chart that came from either the police department or DPW, but I have it and I will send it to you, and actually I'll send it to the whole committee and to the chief. But I think the crash data is from 2022, but still relevant for today. I just want to follow up on the break-ins, Chief. I think you mentioned that there was a series of break-ins targeting Asian American homes. It was in the Newton Patch, and I found some other articles in related to this. But in December, one of the individuals was sentenced to jail. So good news for everyone, and thank you to the Newton Police Department. I want to go to mental health calls. This was in the backup. Over the last 10 years, mental health calls have doubled. Excuse me. Mental health calls have doubled. In 2014, there was 230. 2024, there's 456. Chief, how are the police officers doing when they respond to mental health calls?
So as you all probably know, we have a social worker who's attached to the police department, a co-response clinician. She and her partner, Sergeant Melanie Rooney, work in the problem-oriented police unit or POP unit, and they do a tremendous amount of follow-up based on the calls for service for mental health calls. We also work with H&HS of the city to provide services for those folks. Unfortunately, these calls we go to, I don't want to say the same house time and time again, but we do have the calls that we do go to, we go to these houses more than once for sure. All of our officers are trained in mental health response, not to the extent of a social worker or a physician or anything like that, but we do respond to those types of calls. We offer services. And again, we have the follow-up by our POP unit and Health and Human Services for the city as well. It is taxing on our police officers to respond to some of these calls, whether it's a 10-year-old or an older person who maybe has psychological issues, mental health issues that we don't really quite understand sometimes. We rely on the medics to help us out in situations like that. And other times we rely on the pen and paper. We ended up having to Section 12 folks to get evaluated at one of the hospitals for their well-being. Again, it's not an easy call to go to. We go to these calls all the time, never knowing what to expect and what's really required of a police officer, because this, in the last 15 to 20 years, this has really been an increased call for our services rather at these type of calls.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the clinician, the social worker, it's just one, and I asked this question to Chief Carmichael, I think maybe 3 or 4 different times. Is one enough? One social worker in the department enough to handle all these calls?
Yes and no. Most of the calls that she goes to, they are follow-ups. She seems to think, she and Sergeant Rooney seem to think they have it fairly well handled. They are quite busy, and I think they enjoy the work that they do. Could we have more social workers? Possibly. Again, it depends. We would like to have them around the clock, but I don't know how that works. Being a new chief, I'm not sure how we get those bodies when we don't necessarily have that many significant calls for service that they can respond to immediately. Again, the follow-ups are done after the fact, sometimes 20 minutes later, sometimes a day later, sometimes a week later, depending on the scenario.
Okay, thank you. And just one other thing that was in the backup. Let me just get to it. Here it is. So in the backup, it has Newton Police calls for service totals. And I can see a trend, and that is since 2019, every year since 2019, the number of calls for service has increased. But at the same time, the number of directed patrols have decreased. I mean, you can really see it in the chart. I was just wondering, do you know why that trend exists, or if you can offer an explanation?
I don't know specifically why these trends are happening this way, but I can say that if we're responding for calls for service, we can't possibly be doing directed patrols at the same time. When one goes up, the other one goes down. That's generally how it works. Our officers, they're not busy for their full 8 hours. They do have downtime to go get refuel, to write police reports, but other than that, they're either doing directed patrols or they're responding for calls for service. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay. All right. And okay, so that's all I have. Thank you, and good seeing you twice today. And thank you for your service and all the other officers who serve honorably in the department. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Counselor Bixby.
Thanks. And thanks for coming to update us and give us all this information so early. Although I know you know how things work. So a couple questions. First, I mean, thanks to Councilor Lucas for asking about the mental health things. That was a lot of my questions. And I guess I'll just reiterate, if there are things that you think, if there are times where we might need to be doing something different there, I think we're all here to support what might be needed. And so it seems like things are covered right now, but if there are resources or others that, that we could look at, I think that's such an important thing. And it's notable that it is going up over time. I had a question. It looked like commercial robberies were down over time. And I noticed over the summer you had done some different kind of patrolling and things like that. If you thought certain things were working, that was on that front.
Yeah, I think commercial breaks are much different than residential breaks. Commercial buildings typically have alarm systems. I'm not sure, I know many that don't. That is a big deterrent for burglars. They don't necessarily get cash and items that can be easily pawned, or we have thefts at Lululemon, for instance, and other businesses where people go in and snatch and just grab a bunch of stuff. Not quite the same as the burglaries where they go in after the hours and break into things like that. But that's typically what we see in the breaks is it's usually the businesses are secure. They usually have alarms. They usually don't keep expensive jewelry and money and things that folks can either use for cash or pawn out in the open, and they're usually locked in safes, etc.
And how do you think that the summer Safe Sidewalks program went?
I think it went very well. We had a lot of positive experiences. Oftentimes, we don't get a lot of complaints about what officers do generally, but it seems like this year we had probably 10 or 15 letters from residents and business owners saying, hey, thank you for doing that. I want to appreciate Officer so-and-so. We think that went very well. And that was based on a grant that we had extra money for. That was the D2C. We had extra money for that. So we were able to put that towards Operation Safe Sidewalks. And we plan on doing that again this year whenever we can. Interestingly, when I came on, we had about 210 officers, give or take. And we had officers assigned to Auburndale Square. We had officers assigned to Newton Highlands, Newtonville, West Newton, Nonantum. They were not in every square, but quite a few. And since 2008, 2009, we went down to 135 officers. We have not been able to do those. And I think it's, in my opinion, it's a positive thing that we've done for the community, having the walking beats. The summertime we put bicycles out. That seems to be a big hit with folks. This year we're going to try to get more officers to do community outreach, whether it's on a bicycle, pulling up to a park and hanging out with the kids for a little bit, or doing events like that. Those are things that I think are important, and I think it'd be good for the community. So
that's great. That sounds wonderful. Thank you. And I'm hopeful that that'll all be possible again. So thanks. Another question on the residential burglaries and some of the things you were talking about with transparency and data. I've noticed recently, whether it's been car break-ins or residential, it seems like sometimes people will, post on Facebook, or there's a neighborhood email that goes around, and then there's sort of not really information to let folks know whether, something actually did happen, or, what the extent of it was, or things like that. So would that information also be available through the LexisNexis, or, whatever the data transparency pieces are? Or how would people find that information, I guess?
Yeah, I'm sure that's gonna be part of it. One of the things I know we put out on social media every week, the crimes that we have, they don't give exact addresses. We can definitely look into that. I don't know how best to put that information out. If you folks have ideas, we're happy to consider anything, whether that's putting out, hey, in Woburn, we had 3 house breaks this week. I don't know if that stirs folks up and gets them some anxiety or what, or if it's helpful, but we're happy to consider anything that helps the public stay informed on what's going on. Again, the biggest thing is talking about how to deter folks, whether that's motion sensor lights or cameras that are visible on the outside of the house, or alarm stickers that show the house is alarmed. Those are definitely things that would help.
Great. Thanks for all that info.
Sure.
Thank you. One follow-up question or clarification to Counselor Bixby's questions. The residential and the commercial breaks, and I'm not talking about like the snatch and grab Lululemon examples, are those usually at night?
Yes, usually the houses are closed. So the house breaks, not necessarily. So we had several during Christmas time that folks weren't home for a week at a time. So we don't know exactly when those breaks occurred. But typically speaking, they do those when folks aren't home. One of the reasons for that is if you break into a house, that's a felony. If you break into a house while somebody's there and now you have armed home invasion, now you're in jail for 10 or 15 years. So it's a significant increase. The bad guys know that as well. So they definitely target businesses and houses when folks aren't there.
That is sobering information. Thank you. Do we have other comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any. So first of all, Chief, I just want to thank you and thank your colleagues for the work that you do every day and putting yourselves out there in harm's way to keep us safe. We appreciate you. We're very excited to partner with you in your new role. And I think in this case, a motion to hold would probably be in order, so that if we would like to have this discussion again this term, we can. If others.
I'll move hold and also say, Chief, I'm so sorry. I was sick. I couldn't be at your swearing in. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And if I can just say one thing, again, if folks have ideas on how we can do better community outreach, we're more than happy to consider that. And again, it's not that we don't want to share it. It's just that we don't know what's the most useful to the public. So we've done surveys and we haven't gotten a huge response in the past, but again, we're happy to consider whatever works for everybody.
We appreciate that so much. And please, of course, reach out if there are ever topics that you would like to discuss with this committee and where we can partner in increasing the safety and wellness and experience of our residents. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Okay. Motion to hold by Councillor Lipoff. Any discussion before we vote? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the item's held, and that concludes our business. Have a great evening, everybody.
Good night.